Welcome to Finding Avalon, the podcast that amplifies disabled voices. I'm your host, Jenna, a disability inclusion advocate, communicator, and storyteller. This is a place where disabled folks correct the narrative by sharing authentic lived experiences. Join me as we explore life with disability through our lens, because representation matters. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for the very first episode of Finding Avalon. In this podcast, I'm excited to be centering disabled voices to promote authentic representation. And to do this, I've curated a collection of insightful, relatable, and sometimes surprising disabled stories. Finding Avalon is all about elevating the work and wisdom of disabled, chronically ill, and neurodiverse people. This is a disabled-led project for disabled people and our community allies as we work together for a more inclusive world. I'm Jenna Barnable, a disability inclusion advocate from Atlantic Canada, and I live with multiple disabilities. I draw from my own lived and professional experiences to fight disability discrimination and to educate on self-advocacy, allyship, and anti-ableism. In my advocacy work and in this podcast, I confidently stand on the belief that nobody is better qualified to represent the disabled experience than we ourselves are. In this first episode, I'll be sharing why I created the Finding Avalon podcast and introducing myself as your host before a preview of what's coming up on Season 1. So for the last 10 years, I've been working to advance diversity and inclusion, and for twice as long, I've been a public relations communicator supporting nonprofit organizations, academia, governments, and business. I try to make change however I can, wherever I am, with whatever I have. I give back to the community through advising on national boards and task forces and by mentoring disabled youth and peers. When it comes to mentorship, it's absolutely crucial to be able to reach out for safe and representative guidance from another disabled professional who may be able to relate and give good advice. On International Women's Day in 2023, it was a wonderful surprise to be honored among Atlantic Business's 25 most powerful women in business. This milestone reflected my career leadership and community building contributions, and for me it was a meaningful, full circle moment of representation, showing others what a business leader and change maker looks like when they're a woman and a person with a disability. And as life would have it, with its impeccable timing, at the same time this exciting news came, I was also receiving shocking health news that would crystallize this moment in the most bittersweet way. At the top of my career, having just started a brand new chapter, I learned that my life would never be the same again. Disability doesn't discriminate. We never know when it might enter our lives, and it's far more common than we realize. In fact, right now, 1.6 billion people worldwide live with disability. This is a club that any of us can join at any time, no matter who we are. Disability can come in many ways and at any stage of life, whether that's from birth through illness or injury, or the simple process of aging. The reality is, nobody is immune to disability, or to an accident or an unexpected change in health. So with this in mind, really, there should be no shame in developing a disability, whether that's from becoming ill or injured, being born with a condition, or having lived long enough that age brings it our way. There's really no one face of disability. If you know one disabled person, you simply know one disabled person. Like fingerprints, each one of us is unique, with our own valid experiences and support needs, and no two outcomes are alike. When you consider that nearly 90% of all disabilities are not apparent, someone could be fighting for their life and you may never know it. Finding Avalon is a place of reflection and representation, one story at a time. And I think storytelling is a universal part of being human. It helps us pass along knowledge, express ourselves, connect with each other, and create a sense of understanding between us. I started this project because authentic and consistent disabled representation continues to be lacking in mainstream media and also in social discourse. It's often tokenistic or caricature like because disability is so commonly misunderstood and stigmatized. I wanted to create an indie podcast from a disabled advocate's point of view, one that's a safe space for women and gender diverse folks with an intersectional and neuro inclusive lens. My goal is to present a more accurate, diverse, and dignified view of disability. I'm sure we've all seen and heard plenty of polarizing disabled stories. You know the kind: exceptional stories of inspiration and overcoming all the odds, or tragic cautionary tales of pity or fear. No in between, no nuance, mostly biased stories full of stereotypes told about us by others. Not around here. Instead, I'll let my guests speak for themselves so that they can show off their main character energy in their own stories. Finding Avalon puts the spotlight on special guests, but in this first episode, I'll be introducing myself as your host. I'll start by saying disability doesn't define me. In fact, it's the least interesting thing about me. And if you stick around as this project unfolds, you'll see what I mean. So, my full name is Jennifer, but friends mostly call me Jenna. I'm a proud East Coaster from Newfoundland and Labrador. I've lived across Canada with some stints in the UK and Europe, and currently I'm living in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I love art, culture, and language, and I consider myself a lifelong learner. I almost always choose experiences over material things, and travel is the greatest education I've ever had. I live a pretty unconventional and minimalist life that prioritizes travel over things. This approach has seen me explore nearly 60 countries, from Iceland to Japan and Bosnia to Nicaragua. As time passes and my disabilities progress, I'm learning to adapt my travel to prioritize accessibility and accommodate my changing needs so that travel can remain a meaningful and comfortable experience. Another thing I'm passionate about is storytelling, and I do this through my writing, photography, speaking, and making creative content like this podcast. Along with that, community building and volunteering have always been a big part of my life. For the last 25 years, I've been involved with supporting Indigenous and newcomer organizations, women's groups, humanitarian aid responses, and animal welfare operations, whether that's here at home or overseas. So I mentioned earlier a little bit about my professional work in disability inclusion advocacy, but even more relevant is my personal experience with disability. I came by my disabilities like most people do, at different times in my life and in completely different ways. I was born neurodivergent, something I always knew deep down since I was a little kid, but a formal assessment wasn't accessible to me until later in life. So I'm a late discovered high masking autistic person who lives with ADHD as well. In my early 30s, I became physically disabled after a car accident. And we all know the odds are pretty high that a reckless driver can change your life in an instant. That collision left me with permanent injuries, including head trauma, widespread pain, mobility issues, things that I've been treated for ever since to keep my body functioning. But prior to all of this, something else was happening just under the surface. For about 20 years or so, I'd been reporting concerning symptoms to doctors like debilitating pain, loss of mobility, strength and sensation, stroke-like incidents, and generally feeling like my body was being hot-wired. Doctors repeatedly dismissed me. I was told it was all in my head. It was probably just anxiety, and I had to stop worrying. And I quote, "You're young, go out and live your life. Maybe focus on having some babies." I kid you not, and that's pun intended. Look, I understand that invisible illnesses can be a challenge to diagnose, But it wasn't just one incident of overlooking or a couple of misses. It was years and years of lack of action and dismissiveness. This stems from well-known systemic healthcare barriers like gender bias, patriarchal hubris, and a proven lack of medical research and knowledge about women's bodies. All of this blocks crucial access to timely, unbiased, thorough investigation in order to be able to reach a diagnosis and then access care. In my case, while I was being dismissed year after year, my health, mobility, and well being crumbled. I knew my body, I knew my symptoms and experiences were real, and nobody would listen or do anything about it. In the end, it would take a complete and drastic decline in my health and a desperate trip to a private hospital overseas to finally get the truth. It was not in my imagination. I was, in fact, seriously sick and declining rapidly into further disability. The proof was in my brain and spine, and yes, in fact, this disease was all in my head before it spread throughout my nervous system and my body. By the time I received the care that I needed, permanent damage had been done. It's a bitter pill to swallow to be proven right almost 20 years too late. To me, it's absolutely unacceptable. And yet, it's a sadly familiar experience that so many women and marginalized people encounter with these harmful barriers in medical settings. This should never have happened. All the needless loss and suffering, so much of my life impacted, and yet it happens all the time, all around the world. And I'm betting that some of you listening right now likely know this struggle firsthand. If I was a relentless self-advocate and this was my outcome, what about all of those people who are too unwell, vulnerable, or unsupported to fight? That's one of the many reasons why I keep advocating and educating. For me personally, I used every last ounce of my financial, mental, and emotional resources to get answers and to access care. By the time that I did, I was ground down, right at the time that I needed to be fortifying myself. I had a lifelong fight ahead of me while still picking up the pieces of what was lost and damaged along the way. And that's just what I'm focused on doing because, like so many others, resilience is my only option. That was the shocking news I alluded to about a couple of years ago. For me, it'll always be that record scratch moment in my memory, punctuating how much my life would change. And yet, I'm still me. I am still here. There is too much light in me and fight in me to allow anyone to make my story either a tragedy or an inspiration. Thinking back to that time when everything changed a few years ago, I still won't ever forget the bittersweet moment as I took the stage at the Powerful Women Gala to receive my award in a nice dress using an illuminated walking stick. It will always stand out as a time where my heart felt torn to shreds, but full of pride at the same time. A lot of that evening is a blur of bright lights, applause, managing my symptoms and masking my pain with a smile, the very human hope that I wouldn't stumble and drop my glass statuette or my mobility aid, the warm conversations with peers and mentors, and clapping my hands so hard that they hurt each time a woman crossed the stage to receive her accolades. I know I wasn't the only disabled woman in that ballroom of hundreds of people. So many of us live with non-apparent conditions, and we've learned to mask to get by. I just happened to be the only visibly disabled person in the crowd that night. I share this story because being a leader and a person of impact can look many different ways, and this is why authentic disabled representation is so important. By empowering and educating ourselves and others, we are propelling ourselves towards meaningful change for a world where discrimination has no place and everyone is welcome regardless of their ability or health. So now you know more about me and why I do what I do. I hope sharing some of my story will help somebody else feel seen and less alone, and maybe even motivate people to become more vocal self-advocates and supportive allies. Coming up this season on Finding Avalon, you'll meet some unforgettable disabled guests. We'll talk about life, leadership, collaboration, empowerment, and self-advocacy, and you'll also meet some remarkable non-disabled folks doing valuable allyship work alongside of us in the community. As you listen along to this podcast and learn new perspectives, please remember that we are all always learning and unlearning. So let's continue to normalize talking about the realities of life with disability. And that means giving yourself and others grace to make mistakes, consider other views, change our minds, and adjust our behaviors. These are simple steps that hold a lot of power. They help us grow together and make change for inclusive communities. So, until next time, let's take good care of each other. On our next episode, musician and activist Naomi Kavka will be our featured guest. We'll be talking about her journey with disability and the revelation of self-compassion. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and share. Learn how Finding Avalon got its name in a bonus blog post over at avalonadvocacy.com. Special thanks for permission to feature music from the unreleased song Coal Miner, written by Steve Hoskins, arranged by Naomi Kavka, and performed by Naomi Kavka, Bryn Porter, and Tony Kostelik. Thanks again, everyone. See you next time.